Picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday morning in suburban Ohio, and the silence is shattered by the sound of sirens wailing through the streets. Police cars swarm a modest two-story house on Maple Drive, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in chaos. Neighbors emerge from their homes, coffee mugs in hand, whispering behind cupped palms as they watch officers rush inside. What they discovered that morning would shake this tight-knit community to its core. Inside that house, 43-year-old Robert Miller lay dead, his stepson nowhere to be found. But this wasn't just another family dispute gone wrong. This was something far more twisted, something that would reveal a secret so disturbing that even seasoned detectives would struggle to comprehend it. What would drive a 21-year-old man to murder the only father figure he'd ever known? And what forbidden relationship was this family desperately trying to hide from the world? Before we continue deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Miller family seemed ordinary enough from the outside. Robert Miller, a 43-year-old construction foreman, had married Linda Thompson 3 years earlier, bringing stability to her life and that of her son, Marcus. Linda, a soft-spoken woman in her early 40s, worked as a receptionist at the local dental office. She'd been a single mother for most of Marcus's life, struggling to make ends meet before Robert came along. Marcus Thompson, 21 years old, still lived at home while attending community college part-time and working weekends at a nearby auto shop. He was tall, lean, with dark hair that he kept slightly longer than most young men his age. To outsiders, he appeared quiet, reserved, maybe a little too attached to his mother, but nothing that raised serious red flags. The house on Maple Drive was modest but well-maintained. Robert had worked hard to create a home for his new family, painting the exterior a warm beige, installing new gutters, and maintaining a small garden that Linda loved. Neighbors would often see him in the evenings, tending to yard work or fixing something around the house. He seemed devoted to Linda, always opening car doors for her, bringing her flowers from the grocery store, small gestures that made their relationship appear genuine and loving. But those same neighbors also noticed something else. The way Marcus would watch from the window whenever Robert kissed his mother goodbye. The way he'd find excuses to interrupt their conversations. The way his jaw would tighten whenever he saw them holding hands. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door for 12 years, later told police that she'd heard raised voices coming from the Miller house several times over the past few months. Not screaming matches, she clarified, but intense discussions that would stretch late into the night. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Frustration, anger, and something that sounded almost like pleading. When pressed for details, she admitted that most of these arguments seemed to involve Marcus and Robert, with Linda's voice occasionally joining in, always sounding tearful and strained. Detective Sarah Chen had been investigating domestic crimes for 8 years, but something about the Miller case felt different from the moment she stepped into that house. The scene was too clean, too controlled. Robert Miller had been struck in the head with a baseball bat, but there were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds on his hands, nothing to suggest he'd fought back, or even seen the attack coming. It was as if someone he trusted completely had surprised him. When Marcus was brought in for questioning the following day, his story began to unravel almost immediately. He claimed he'd been at work that morning, but his supervisor at the auto shop confirmed he'd called in sick. He said he hadn't spoken to Robert in days, but phone records showed a heated 40-minute conversation between them just hours before the murder. Most troubling of all, when asked about his relationship with his stepfather, Marcus's answers became increasingly erratic and defensive. He'd refer to Robert as an intruder, someone who didn't belong in their house, someone who had ruined everything that was perfect about his life with his mother. It was Linda's reaction that truly caught Detective Chen's attention. Most mothers would be devastated, demanding answers, begging police to find their husband's killer. But Linda Thompson sat in the police station interview room with an expression that could only be described as guilt-ridden terror. She kept wringing her hands, avoiding eye contact, and when asked directly about Marcus's whereabouts the morning of the murder, she hesitated just a moment too long before answering. That hesitation would prove to be the crack that brought everything tumbling down. The breakthrough came when investigators searched Marcus's bedroom and found a journal hidden beneath his mattress. The entries, dating back nearly 2 years, painted a picture so disturbing that even veteran detectives had to take breaks while reading through them. Page after page detailed an inappropriate relationship between Marcus and his mother that had begun shortly after his 18th birthday. The entries spoke of secret meetings when Robert was at work, of a connection that Marcus described as deeper than anything he'd ever experienced, and of growing resentment toward the man who was unknowingly sharing his wife with her own son. But the most chilling entries were the most recent ones. Marcus wrote about Robert becoming suspicious, about late-night confrontations where his stepfather demanded to know why Marcus wouldn't move out, why he seemed so possessive of Linda, why he looked at her in ways that made Robert deeply uncomfortable. The final entry, written just days before the murder, contained a single, bone-chilling sentence. He knows. He's going to destroy everything we've built together. I can't let that happen. How would you feel if you discovered that someone in your own family was hiding such a dark secret? Can you imagine the horror of realizing that the person you trusted most was living a lie that would ultimately lead to murder? The interrogation room at the county police station had seen countless confessions over the years, but nothing quite like what unfolded when Marcus Thompson finally decided to tell the truth. Detective Chen had been questioning him for 3 hours, methodically presenting evidence, pointing out inconsistencies in his story, when something in Marcus's demeanor suddenly shifted. The defensive anger melted away, replaced by something far more unsettling, a calm, almost relieved acceptance of what was about to happen. Marcus began by trying to explain the relationship with his mother, painting it as something beautiful that others wouldn't understand. He spoke about feeling abandoned by his biological father, about Linda being the only constant in his chaotic childhood, about a bond that grew stronger and more complicated as he entered adulthood. According to Marcus, the physical relationship began during a particularly difficult time in Linda's life, when she was struggling with depression and loneliness. He described himself as her protector, her comfort, the one person who truly understood her needs. But as he continued talking, the disturbing nature of their relationship became clear. This wasn't a consensual adult relationship that happened to involve family members. This was a pattern of manipulation and control that Marcus had established over his vulnerable mother. He spoke about isolating her from friends, about convincing her that their relationship was special and pure, about making her believe that any outside interference would destroy both of their lives. When Robert entered the picture, Marcus saw him as a direct threat to the control he'd spent years establishing. The morning of the murder, according to Marcus's confession, Robert had confronted both him and Linda about his suspicions. He'd noticed the way they interacted, the secretive glances, the way Linda would become nervous and withdrawn whenever the three of them were in the same room together. Robert had demanded that Marcus move out immediately and had threatened to call the police if he discovered anything inappropriate was happening under his roof. For Marcus, this ultimatum represented the end of everything he believed he was entitled to. Marcus described waiting in the garage that morning, knowing Robert's routine, knowing exactly when he'd come outside to load his truck for work. The attack was swift and brutal, delivered with a baseball bat that Marcus had taken from the garage. What chilled investigators most was the matter-of-fact way Marcus described the killing, as if he were discussing something as mundane as taking out the trash. There was no remorse, no recognition that he'd taken a man's life, only frustration that Robert had forced his hand by threatening to expose their secret. The trial of Marcus Thompson began 6 months later, drawing media attention from across the state. The courtroom was packed daily with reporters, curious onlookers, and family members, trying to make sense of how such a horrific crime could emerge from what appeared to be an ordinary suburban household. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Roberts, painted Marcus as a manipulative predator who had groomed his own mother and killed an innocent man to protect his criminal behavior. The defense, however, argued for a more complex interpretation of events. Defense attorney Jennifer Walsh contended that Marcus was himself a victim of an abusive family dynamic that had warped his understanding of appropriate relationships. She brought in expert witnesses who testified about the psychological damage that could result from blurred family boundaries and parental manipulation. According to the defense narrative, Linda Thompson had been the initiator of their inappropriate relationship, taking advantage of her son's emotional vulnerability and natural dependence on her as his primary caregiver throughout his childhood. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Linda Thompson took the witness stand. She appeared gaunt, her hands trembling as she was sworn in, her voice barely audible as she began to testify. Under careful questioning from the prosecution, she admitted to the physical relationship with her son, but claimed it had been entirely his idea, that she had felt powerless to resist his advances and threats. She described feeling trapped between her love for Robert and her fear of what Marcus might do if she tried to end their inappropriate relationship. But under cross-examination, a different picture emerged. Defense attorney Walsh presented evidence of Linda's own troubled childhood, her history of inappropriate relationships with much younger men, her pattern of emotional manipulation that predated Marcus's birth. Phone records showed that Linda had been the one initiating most of their secret meetings. Text messages revealed her expressing jealousy when Marcus showed interest in girls his own age, and financial records indicated that she had been giving him money and gifts in ways that suggested she was the one maintaining their twisted dynamic. The testimony that shocked everyone came from Marcus himself. Against his attorney's advice, he insisted on taking the stand to tell his version of events. What emerged was a chilling portrait of a young man who genuinely believed he had done nothing wrong. He spoke about his relationship with his mother as if it were the most natural thing in the world, expressing genuine confusion about why society would condemn something that brought them both happiness. When asked about Robert's murder, Marcus showed no remorse, instead focusing on his anger that an outsider had tried to interfere in their family's private business. But the most disturbing revelation came when prosecutors presented evidence that this pattern of inappropriate behavior might have been going on much longer than anyone had realized. School counselors testified about concerning behaviors they'd observed when Marcus was still a minor. Neighbors recalled instances of Linda being overly physical with her teenage son, and medical records suggested that Linda had discouraged Marcus from developing relationships with peers throughout his adolescence. How would you react if you were on that jury, having to decide between viewing Marcus as a victim of abuse or a calculating killer? What would your verdict be if you had to determine whether justice meant punishment or treatment for someone whose entire understanding of family relationships had been so fundamentally warped? After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Marcus Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and anguish as the sentence was read. Robert Miller's sister, who had attended every day of the trial, broke down in tears, finally feeling that some measure of justice had been served for her brother's senseless death. But the verdict represented only the beginning of the aftermath for everyone involved in this tragic case. Linda Thompson, who had initially been charged as an accessory to murder, ultimately pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received a 10-year sentence. During her sentencing hearing, she finally seemed to grasp the full horror of what had transpired. She spoke tearfully about failing her son, about allowing a toxic relationship to develop that ultimately cost an innocent man his life, about the shame and guilt that would follow her for the rest of her days. The community of Maple Drive never fully recovered from the revelation of what had been happening in their quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had heard those late-night arguments, moved away within months of the trial's conclusion. She told reporters that she could no longer sleep at night, wondering if there were other dark secrets hiding behind the closed doors of homes she'd always considered safe and normal. Property values in the area dropped significantly, as families decided they no longer wanted to live in a place associated with such disturbing crimes. The psychological impact on everyone involved extended far beyond the immediate family. Robert Miller's co-workers described struggling with survivor's guilt, wondering if they should have recognized signs that their friend and colleague was in danger. The auto shop where Marcus had worked part-time closed temporarily as the owner dealt with the trauma of having unknowingly employed someone capable of such violence. Even the investigating officers required counseling to process the disturbing nature of the case and the manipulation they'd witnessed. Perhaps most tragically, the case highlighted how easily signs of abuse and manipulation could be hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Child protection experts who reviewed the case identified multiple missed opportunities where intervention might have prevented the ultimate tragedy. Teachers, neighbors, family members, and community leaders all expressed regret about not recognizing the warning signs that, in retrospect, seemed so obvious. Marcus Thompson, now serving his life sentence at a maximum security prison, has shown no remorse for his actions. According to corrections officers, he continues to maintain that his relationship with his mother was consensual and appropriate, and that Robert Miller's death was justified as protection of their family unit. Prison psychologists have diagnosed him with several personality disorders, but note that his complete lack of empathy makes rehabilitation extremely unlikely. The Miller family tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of family relationships, the long-term effects of abuse, and the devastating consequences when inappropriate boundaries are allowed to develop and persist over time. This case reminds us that the most dangerous predators are often those who operate within the supposed safety of family structures, using trust and emotional dependency to maintain control over their victims. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this entire story is the question of prevention. How many warning signs were missed along the way? How many opportunities for intervention were overlooked by teachers, neighbors, and family members who sensed something wasn't quite right, but chose not to get involved? And most disturbing of all, how many other families might be hiding similar secrets behind closed doors in neighborhoods just like Maple Drive? The death of Robert Miller serves as a tragic reminder that family dysfunction, when left unchecked, can escalate to unimaginable levels of violence and destruction. His only crime was loving a woman and trying to protect her from a toxic relationship she was too damaged to recognize or escape on her own. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, if you noticed concerning behavior in a family you knew, would you have the courage to speak up? And how well do you really know the people living in the houses around you? Sometimes the most ordinary-looking families harbor the darkest secrets of all. What are your thoughts on this case? How do you think justice should handle situations where the line between victim and perpetrator becomes so blurred? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how this story has affected you. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep examinations of cases that challenge our understanding of family, justice, and human nature.